All right, we're back. And tonight we've thought about talking about Endgame and maybe some Joseph Campbell type stuff. Um, and I've just been thinking Endgame, I don't this is a tricky one. This is complicated. Um, so yeah, what are some of your thoughts on developing an Endgame?
Well, the easiest way is to start with it, is
Mm,
to like do your plotting from the end back to the beginning, or at least maybe start with the beginning and then immediately figure out what you think the end is, and then connect everything in between, but kind of know the end early on.
yeah, or have some sense for something pivotal that might have happen at the end. I mean, one thing I've thought about is that I mean, probably more than anything else, like the end, like the rising action towards the climax and the end is probably what defines whatever type of story it is that you're reading. Um, I think like a story could begin in one place, but by the ending, like we know we have some expectations of what kind of story this is. Um,
Yeah, but also kind of in the setup in the early chapters, you're making promises to the reader,
hmm,
and you need to keep those promises. So built into your beginning is kind of a sense of what the end is going to be. Like we know what is going to be there at the end. We maybe don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we know what kind of the stakes are and what the elements that the end is going to be are promises that were made at the beginning, you know.
yeah, I
If they're
agree.
if they're not, then the reader feels kind of lied to, or at least
Hmm,
I as a reader,
hmm.
if in the first couple chapters I get excited about a story, and then the end is not addressing those things, I'm kind of pissed.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I can think of a number of books that I felt like did not do anything that I felt like they were promising that they would do. Um, Probably most famously is like the Don DeLillo book. I can't remember which one it is, but it's with the baseball at the very beginning. Like it's got that great opening. Underworld.
Underworld, yeah. Hmm.
I hated that book because it made so many great promises in the first. And I think I read somewhere that the book started as a short story and then he tried to grow it into a novel. Like it was an encapsulated story already, and then he decided to turn it into a novel, which is probably a warning in itself if you, I don't know, to start out with a completed story and then try to turn a completed story into a novel. That seems kind of, I don't know. There's something wrong with that. I can't quite pinpoint what it is, but I think it's because like the story should have a complete arc in it already. So how could you put another arc onto it without, I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so I got to thinking about, so this does relate to Joseph Campbell because we're talking about, like, with Joseph Campbell, we're talking about the hero's journey, and in the hero's journey, you have this idea that the hero kind of begrudgingly uh, is goes out or is sent out to confront some great evil, and pretty much nearly dies in the process of confronting it, but then miraculously pulls through and returns, comes back with some great knowledge or some further insight, or perhaps just comes back triumphant over the evil or whatever. And there's this triumphal return. So I think there's a lot of movies that deal with that. There's a lot of stories that we read that are have that basic template. That is one type of end game. Is this it writ large? Is the idea of the heroic return? Um, so
Yes. In Joseph Campbell, the end game is the return. It happens after the climax, actually.
right.
Um, I'm trying to like a film that I thought of that like does this well. I'm not vouching for the film. I have some problems with the film, but it's not a bad film, but it's not great either. But it does this really well. Is M. Night Shyamalan's The Village.
Mhm.
So the journey kind of into the other world is from the moment that she leaves, that she steps into the forest that is kind of forbidden, and then she comes out the end of the forest into like the world that we live in, you know. But the return is she needs to get the medicine and take it back to heal the boy.
Mhm.
That's the return. And that is like, we're not really caring about if she defeats the monster in the forest. He actually deals with that pretty with short shrift kind of early on, because it's
Mhm.
not the point. The point is the return.
That's good. Yeah, I and so a lot of times what are the ways that that's promised? You know what I mean? Like early on. So for example, oftentimes the hero, um, when they first show up, they're asleep or they're resting or they're in some kind of repose. So there's this idea of sleep and wake cycles. A lot of times things are shown in high contrast. So like um, good guys might be in bright colors and the bad guys might be in dark colors. Like there's a high contrast between the two opposing sides, whatever
Mm.
they may be. And again, these things are just they're cycles. They're showing things that are cyclical, like day and nighttime. Oftentimes the hero is an orphan or doesn't is they're estranged from their parents or there's some desire to reconcile with their parents. And so again, there's that sense of like having to go back in time and figure out who this person's origins are and so in all these ways like the return is foreshadowed. You know, so it's every element of the story is kind of pointing us in this direction of like the heroic return. um I think another kind of story that is important is like the boy meets girl kind of story, right? And I do think it's different from from the heroic story because there's not this idea of the return. Oftentimes we don't care about um if their parents are characters in this story, they're kind of marginal characters, or they are really just there to like serve the interest of kind of these two people getting together. Um, but the ways that these types of stories, like the foreshadowing is, in some way that they're incomplete. Like the boy is incomplete, the girl is incomplete. They don't recognize how they're incomplete. They're gonna butt heads. Like they're not gonna work well together. And all of these things are like telling us what kind of end game we're going to have in this story, right? That at the end they're going to kiss or get married or whatever. Um, because like that marriage, like really the kind of the thing that the the proof of the pudding, as it were, is like that their attraction to each other is going to be shown through their various oppositions to each other or through those forces that would oppose them being together, like with Romeo and Juliet. Um, and so that's the way that we illustrate the strength of their affection or their caring for each other is through these oppositions. Um, but again, like I do think you're right in saying that like so much of what makes the end game is there in the initial moves. Um, well, I do want to go back to Joseph Campbell because I think there's a lot that you can say about like the hero's journey that isn't just like the end game type stuff. So let's step back from end game for just a second and talk about what are those things that kind of happen in the middle, that really kind of form the meat of the story. How do you negotiate that stuff? How does Joseph Campbell help with that?
Well, Yeah, sorry. The point of the middle is the hero at the beginning is not the person that can do the thing that he or she needs to do. So the character at the beginning has a goal. They have a thing that they need to accomplish by the end, but
Hmm.
they are not the person that is capable of doing that yet. The middle is about turning them into the person who can do the thing that must be done. So they will become the person who can do the thing. And our job is to kind of give them the obstacles to overcome that will prepare them to be the person that when they get to the end and they do the thing, the reader believes that they could do that now, when they very clearly kind of weren't that person at the beginning. And if they were already that person at the beginning, then the story is just inherently going to be kind of unsatisfying because a great transformation did not occur.
Hmm.
And then it begs the question, why was this a story worth telling?
Yeah.
A person did a thing that they could easily do. Big whoop.
It is interesting to think about. I think Robert McKee really kind of hammers this point, or maybe it's Save the Cat. Maybe it's Save the Cat. But the idea being that like the act two really is the story. Like it is the story. Like the act one is just introduction, act three is just resolution. But so much of like what makes the story compelling, that what makes the characters relatable and fun and interesting is what happens in act two. And it's something that's being illustrated in opposition, or by foiling the character, we start to see them in a different light. um, I thought about you recently because I read or listened to the audiobook for a man called Uva. It was great book, really amazing use of metaphor and simile throughout. Like that's I can't understand why they made it into a movie, because, or a couple of movies actually, because so much of what makes the book enjoyable is the use of metaphor and simile in it. Um, but it has this ending. I'm not going to give it away, but initially it has the ending of the warrior going to Valhalla, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a Swedish book, and
Yeah.
it's very Swedish. Um, like a major concern of the book is like which kind of car should you drive, like a Volvo or a Saab. Um, but but there is this, he puts it out there like, does Uva go to Valhalla, right? And I'm not trying to give away too much of the book, and he doesn't. Like it's interesting. You think that's where he's going and he doesn't. And I think that's really satisfying to have a book that, even though you think you're going there, like all of a sudden, oh, this is very satisfying to have this one ending, but now there's this other ending. I think it is good to kind of have that, a really strong false ending. Um, and that book is probably has the strongest false ending of any book I've ever read. Um, and it's a very satisfying false ending. Um, but uh but yeah, that I think you really know, because I found that in writing my first X-ray tech book. Actually it's the second one I realized I needed a false ending. And that became very important to me, like actually what happened in the writing after what I thought initially was the ending was like very very important stuff. So there's an endurance match there where it's like, you think you got an ending, but do you? You know, um, you got to go back and
Well, I
see.
think that's the best way to find that. Like if you
Yeah,
over kind of plan it, it's gonna feel fake. Like
yeah,
the reader's not gonna be the reader's not gonna buy into it. They're not gonna be fooled by it. They know there's
yeah,
another ending coming.
yeah,
If you're genuinely surprised that there was actually a different ending, then hopefully the reader will be too.
yeah.
But if you just plan it that way, I'm skeptical that it's actually going to work. There's a Robert Frost quote. Robert Frost says, "No tears in the No tears in the poet, no tears in the reader. No
Hmm.
surprise in the poet, no surprise in the reader. So
Yeah,
if you're yourself, we're not like, if you were not startled by what you did, then the reader isn't going to be either.
that's good. That's really good. Yeah, so it's like we're saying it. It's funny. I think this. So to go back to the very beginning, what I said was talking about endings is kind of difficult, and I think we're right on top of the difficulty. Is like we're saying that it needs to be foreshadowed. It needs to. We need to know what kind of story we're reading. All the promises need to be answered, but it has to be surprising. You know what I mean? Like there still has to be the sense of like surprise. Um,
Yeah, well, isn't the cliche that like the perfect ending is one that nobody saw coming, but in hindsight was inevitable?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's what we're asking for. So be
yeah,
perfect, man.
yeah. It's a sleight of hand trick. It's a definite sleight of hand trick, and I think that what's interesting is like so when you go back, so once you have a completed manuscript, then you can finish the trick. I think this is the only. We're not a performance art. Like the magician has to do it in time. We actually have this wonderful ability to go back and layer stuff in. And there's so much information we're giving to readers. They're trying to figure out what the breadcrumbs are that they need to follow. You can actually drop a ton of once you figure out where is you're going and what is surprising. You can go back and layer. In the second draft, you can go back and layer all this stuff in there, layer those contrasts in, layer those foreshadowing moments in, and it's really kind of fun what happens then the illusion is complete, then the illusion is complete. So I think it's worthwhile to expect the return, but write as though no one's ever going to get out of here alive, you know um
I've gotten good results out of this. I've even like written right up to the end, but not written the end, and then gone back and did
hmm,
revision,
okay.
saving the writing of the end for like the very end after
Yeah,
revision.
yeah, I think you did that with Crow's Head. I remember that.
I did, yeah. The ending was not, and the second novel in that is going to be the same way too.
Hmm.
Um, the ending will be kind of like the last discovery that I make before it's done, you know.
Well, that's it for tonight. The timer has rung. Next Tuesday is going to be really our last chance to kind of chat before we start writing. Um, so let's think a little bit about what we might want to last things we might want to discuss. Um, I think I think it might be good to touch on. I don't normally go down this path a whole lot, but we'll talk about it about whether we want to address any of the self-discovery aspects of writing, like how
Well, I
self-discovery
want to talk
works.
about that. I think it's an important part of
Yeah.
what we're doing. So maybe we don't have necessarily need to do that on Tuesday, but it needs to be a thing that we'd like talk about.
Oh, that's right. But and also I we want to think a little bit about yeah, we've got a surprise for you on Tuesday. So yeah, come back to the channel next week. We'll have something for people on Tuesday. I'm not sure what, but we got something. All right, man. Well, have a good night.
All right, yeah, take care.